Welcome back and thanks for staying with African News Network First Fast Alive. Claims of vote buying at the ANC conferences have resurfaced. NEC member and former presidential candidate Minister Sisulu says the party needs to change how to elect office bearers. In a radio interview, Sisulu says her presidential campaign was unsuccessful due to lack of resources. The NEC member has allegedly said money changes hands at elective conferences. And responding to ANN7, Minister Sisulu denies having made these remarks, and Sisulu calls for transparent ways to elect party officials. And this includes allowing candidates to address and field questions from provincial structures. I'm joined on the line by Minister of Human Settlements, Sisulu, ANC NEC member. Good evening to you, Minister, and thank you so much for your time. We do have it on record and spoken to the reporter Clement Manyatela, who confirmed that indeed this is what you had said around money changing hands to buy votes in the party. What is your reaction?
I haven't read the entire report that we are basing ourselves on, so it would be very difficult for me to answer in full, except that I was very disturbed with the bits that I read, because it gave the impression that the discussion was around whether or not I would run for election. That was not the point. And I've called Clement, and he has conceded that that's not how he wrote the story. So I am calling on him to put the correct facts on the table.
I beg your pardon, Minister, but give us the context then in terms of the discussions that you had with a colleague.
Fine. He said to me, you know, when you were campaigning, you indicated that the members of the ANC will be deployed anywhere where they are going to be deployed. Are you still sticking to that? He already asked me if I would accept the position of a deputy president. And I said, you know, this is very unfair. You're actually putting undue pressure on President Ramaphosa. Allow him to make his choice. And he said, but you said that, you know, members of the ANC would be deployed. I said, no, but you're now taking it out of context, because here you're specifically talking about a particular position. Then we moved on, and I indicated to him that it had been a very hectic time. It was. And that I marveled at the way that the president was able to stand up and deliver his speech after this two-week hectic time. We talked on about how the elections had gone, and I indicated to him that I am drawn to a review of the electoral process, because I had an experience, or had been told of the experience of Mozambique, which is a liberation movement, which conducts its elections very different from ours. And for me, that is a more attractive way of conducting them, instead of leaving them to the individual, because it opens it up to so many other measures that are outside of a political and liberation movement.
Yes. Minister, I believe your time is limited as you're about to board a flight.
I am boarding.
Yes, so just very quickly though, would you say that it is a concern that this practice of vote buying, you know, there are loopholes in that?
Yes, you see, but at the same time, I think journalists must be mindful of the fact that they put the sequence of things in order so that it is not misinterpreted. That is something that everybody conceded at the time that we were dealing with that conference. It's over now. Now we're dealing with a new era. And the way that, for me, the way that it was conflated in the story raised concerns. And it made it extremely inaccurate. I've asked Clement to correct it, and I hope he corrects it. Secondly,
Minister Lindy, I beg your pardon.
Come again?
No, I beg your pardon. Please pick up on your train of thought.
Yes, and the other thing is that it's put in a context as though I had been contesting the president at the conference. I didn't. At the point when I realized that there was no possibility for me to continue the contest for presidency, I conceded and agreed to be his deputy. So the story has absolutely no basis in truth. The foundation of the story just is completely twisted.
We're going to leave it there. We appreciate your time. Bon voyage and happy landings. That's Minister of Human Settlements, Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, and ANC NEC member, giving us clarity on an earlier report that there is money exchanging hands in the elective processes of the ANC, and this results in voter buying. We're joined by Adil Nchabileng, who is here this evening to talk, amongst other things, around the deconcentration of the financial sector. But before that, can you give us a response as well in how perhaps the elective processes can be reformed to avoid any inducement of members?
Good evening, Cindy. I think what transpired, even though as Minister Lindiwe was saying that it was a misreporting, it's quite important to actually note the fact that electoral processes are, especially in the case of the ANC, in this case, that you have a movement that represents the aspirations and actually the wishes of grassroots communities and societies. And in that context, you don't want to undermine grassroots voices as well as grassroots participation at a broader level with regards to leadership contestation. Because if it is going to be driven by money primarily, you're going to lose that grassroots identity particularly. Secondly, you're going to lose that grassroots support because the grassroots communities don't necessarily have the money to raise as such in order to participate within these particular electoral processes. Secondly is the leadership that actually could have been probably the most optimum and actually most desired. The fact that they do not have, like what we've seen in December 2017, you had over 7 candidates for presidency, but it came down to 2 really key candidates who was toe-to-toe on the basis that one candidate had money and the other had some money, and they both could contest. The other candidates didn't really have money, and there was no budgets, no resources to campaign, not even really money to actually organize provinces. So it is quite a very important aspect that is actually coming through. The ANC needs to reform within itself with regards to electoral processes, and it has to look at how they start really representing. Here you have a party which has over 800 members, 1,000 members. Within that 800,000 members, if you start silencing the voices of the members by ensuring that money becomes the catalyst in terms of selection of leadership, you're going to have a problem going forward.
All right, Sisulu Ndlovu, political analyst, joins us on the phone line. Good evening to you and thanks for joining us. I mean, in the political space, we know that, of course, business would have vested interest into who ascends to power and primarily who becomes the president of the country, and ministers in various departments where business or rather lucrative contracts are available or up for the taking. In your view, Mr. Ndlovu, how do you, as a political party, ensure that your policies are not swayed based on who the donors are?
Cindy, thank you. Good evening to you and good evening to the listeners and the panelists. Cindy, that is the question that South Africans now are battling to ask, whether a certain political party is being controlled by somebody or individual or a group of companies sitting somewhere. As all of us we know now, that there is a vast interest to the ruling party, that people are trying to control the ruling party through its elected representatives. But now we need to question that logic, whether political members, they must be funded when they go to campaign for election. If they are to be funded by who, and if those people fund them, which criteria is it put across to make sure that they don't come back and demand something in return? We have learned, me and you, Cindy, that prior your Nazareth conference in Soweto, we have had members being mobilized, given money and all benefits in order for them to vote a certain candidate. But that in itself, it has to change now. It shouldn't be a tradition, because if that becomes a practice within our political parties, it overthrows or overtakes what as a public we think it's a best democracy. It's no longer a best democracy, because a certain individual then will come back and try to control that certain political party.
Yeah, and Mr. Ndlovu, where do you think it's more prevalent? Is it internally or does it come from external forces?
No, those are external forces. You have those big conglomerates who have an interest in making sure that they mobilize certain people to make sure that when they mobilize them, they get into power. They try to demand, after getting into power, demanding certain favors. So it's not internal, it's external.
All right, Dylan Chabeleng, Transform RSA president, is with us as well. Mr. Ndlovu, please stay with ANN7. The thing about the infiltration of the ANC as well, and the fact that there's, you could say, conflict of interest by virtue of the BEX that had allowed the political elite or bourgeoisie, and that in itself could create an environment where members are bought or votes are bought. Adil, is this the reality? We hear it anecdotally, but I would need another voice to confirm.
It's very interesting because these allegations were made, and the companies that were named actually in the allegations leading to the December 2017 conference in Nasrec, none of the companies actually disputed the fact that they actually supported and funded particular interest groups within the movement. At the time, they were referred to as factions, but it was not a faction, it was people who were supporting a particular position within the party. Yes, it is a fact that corporations have massive interest in terms of controlling political parties' outcomes, particularly on aspect of leadership. Remember, if you choose a leader or you choose a delegate of your choice, and that delegate is funded properly, money does not just exchange hands without getting back the favor. No, there's no free lunch anywhere. Anybody who pays for something has an expectation in return for whatever they paid for. So if the ANC has taken money, for instance, from companies and corporations, they are going to be paying back that money with some form of giving back based on the state equivalent in terms of benefits.
Would you agree also with the criticism that the ANC has lost its revolutionary gravitas based on that neoliberal influence that the party has been induced with?
I fully concur. I mean, we're one of the few people that who have said it very clearly, have called a spade, that the ANC is losing its revolutionary core. And as such, we have to look outside the ANC in terms of the social civil society movements in order to find the gravitas core of the revolutionary movement, to say that the issues that the people are struggling with are no longer echoed strongly within the ANC. We see an ANC that is much more amenable to looking at the interests, particularly of global international markets, international companies that are interested in South Africa, as well as people who are not necessarily suffering in South Africa. So when it comes to the voices of the marginalized majority poor, you'll find that the ANC is now starting to actually lack in its revolutionary core, where it should have been addressing these issues. For instance, there is a 2019 elections coming up. What is the ANC going to do if they cannot deliver on one single resolution that was taken in Nasrec, particularly the resolution of land expropriation without compensation? There will be a movement that will say clearly, no land, no vote. What is the ANC going to do? Those are some of the issues that we're actually confronted with. And really, it has to be time now that the current leadership, President Ramaphosa, has to take a pause and saying, am I leading a movement that represents the interests of the people on the ground? Or am I leading a movement that represents the interests of business? That is the balance he has to bring in. And if it is going to be balanced in only one aspect of it, just to please the business and not give back what the people are looking for, 2019 is going to be a spelling point where clear lines are going to be drawn and voters are going to give us a most surprising outcome.
And of course, there's much at stake for 2019, especially for the ruling party. But we thank Sbusiso Ndlovu, political analyst, who joined us earlier on the phone line. We invite Retepo Kadima, political analyst. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. He joins us via Skype. But just in your response to this whole idea that the ANC's elective policies need to be reformed, that structures and provinces need to be able to debate with whoever the candidates are that want to ascend to power.
Well, indeed, I believe that this question was made even more relevant by the Constitutional Court judgment into the secret ballot application that was made by the political parties in the last motion of no confidence, in that the Constitutional Court was very clear and was at pains to highlight the need for our politics to be kept clear of any corruption or money having any role to play in our politics. So the African National Congress, it is duty-bound to have had to, at this juncture, to have sat back and said, in the future, how are they to run the elections to ensure that money does not determine the politics, but that indeed the will of the people can be seen to be clearly expressed. And I believe one of the mechanisms they should look at employing is similar to what we've seen happening in the United States, whereby political party funding, specifically for presidential candidates, it receives a greater deal of scrutiny, and that there is an audit to the finances that various political candidates would have earned from the municipal council, in our case, all the way even to the presidency.
Yeah, but Tsapo, what is it about the elective process right now that lacks the transparency and, you know, there's a level of secrecy as to when nominations can be made or announcements as well?
Well, that is not very much of, I think, of a big problem. I think the problem that has been highlighted, and Mr. Clement Manyatel, as much as he has brought it in and the minister disputes, it is a very relevant question to say, did money have any role to play in how the outcome of the election, of the, electoral process went? And clearly, money had a role to play. The question, therefore, is that could that be seen to be the will of the people expressed in a fair manner? And the answer would be that, well, not quite, because to some degree, the vested corporate interests, which the other analysts mentioned about earlier today, in fact, they are a poison into the politics. They are removing the integrity and the honesty of politics. So in terms of when and how you announce whether a candidate can say, I am available, for me is not as big a question as that of the role of vested interest, which manifests in the form of funding to candidate A or B, and not only that, even seeking to say the delegates that go to conference can depart from the mandate so given by their own branch structure and now be persuaded to vote according to how they have been financially induced. That clearly cannot be good for politics, because honesty and integrity is adversely affected.
But isn't that the nature of influencing people, winning friends, mobilizing, etc., that to incentivize those that you'd want to win or vote in a particular way?
Look, like what was mentioned, we're not in the United States or we're not in Europe, whereby their democracy as well as their leadership positions as well as their political parties are advanced to the stage whereby it's no longer about basic needs that are required within a society. Here you have a situation whereby South Africa is still an ailing democracy. If you start using money in order to influence the political outcome, you might as well actually declare corporate interest in politics. Let the companies start voting if it is possible. But if they're voting through their purse and are using that purse influence in order to sway the decisions and the outcome, you are going to have a warped democracy, because it means the voice of the people is actually muted. There is no longer constitutional rights for people to say, I'm voting for an X party, because that particular X party might be representing a particular corporate interest, which has happened in many countries actually, whereby you start seeing certain interests of companies actually emerging because they had a precedent of their own choice. In South Africa, we're still at an early stage to start seeing that.
The minister is also proposing that office bearers are elected differently, that there needs to be some form of modernization of the process where people can debate and take questions from provincial structures. But when it comes to a branch representative who has a clear mandate on a particular candidate and then they induced in the process and decides to vote differently, what recourse does the party have?
In this case, it's very small recourse, because the party follows what the branches actually bring forward. So if branches have already caucused and agreed that this is our choice of candidate, whether national accepts or not is irrespective, national follows what the branches give them, like what you have seen Imagine now.
No, I'm saying as the leader or representative of a branch, if they betray that mandate to say, we are going with this particular candidate. Correct. What measures are in place to ensure that they don't deviate from what the branches want?
At this stage, very little, because the ballot itself is actually made by individuals in secret, and nobody gets to see who votes for what and how they're voting. So it's very small chances that you can actually enforce unless you have people who have agreed. Like you have seen in December, it was expected that there would be an outcome of a particular nature. And that outcome didn't happen because one particular province decided at the last minute that they are actually going to switch their vote and actually present a different kind of an outcome. So that part of saying you are going to hold candidates responsible for how they are casting their vote will be undemocratic. People must be given the chances and the choice. Yes, the branches nominate a candidate of their choice, and they give a delegate the opportunity to say, on our behalf as branch members, go and cast our vote in respect to a particular candidate. And to enforce that is going to be extremely difficult to say each and every individual, unless you did what EFF did in Gauteng, when they were actually ensuring that each and every candidate, delegate who was going to vote in order to establish the metro in Gauteng would actually be giving a clear vote to show the commissioner at the time, who was actually the commissar, who was a Floyd, to say, this is my vote, this is my vote. If the ANC would to conduct it like that, probably there's a chance. But apart from that, there's really a slim chance.
All right, let's thank Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, who joined us on the phone line. We now have Professor Perry Hanyane, political analyst. He's a professor with the University of the Northwest. Thank you so much, Professor Hanyane. In your view, how does the 106-year-old movement evolve from the way it's been conducting its elective processes?
Good evening, Cindy. Good evening to your viewers and your studio guest. Look, overall, it needs to be part and parcel of what I would refer to the ANC's renewal strategy. Bottom line is, are we moving away from old technology, for instance, into the kind of envisaged technology that would assist especially avoiding the embarrassment that we saw at Nasrec last year, where allegedly some votes were put aside and not added as part of the overall calculations for whatever reason was advanced. So in essence, one would then suggest that the renewal of the ANC should also look at its office as well. We're living in the 21st century where technology is the norm. Is the ANC going that route in terms of managing a whole range of administrative processes and not only confined to polling, for instance?
Yeah, and let's talk about organizational capacity as it stands at its headquarters, with many deployments being made to cabinet and leaving that vacuum or a skill set absent in the headquarters. Could that also be part of the problem as to why the party is struggling with what one would say rudimentary things, like membership registration, for example?
Cindy, it's perhaps one area that needs to be addressed, but overall, my concern, and I've raised this issue over a couple of times through your media station, that I don't hear that boldness within the ANC that says we are a 21st century political party. Quite rightly, it's a century-old party that has evolved over a period of time, but I'm not too convinced that it has evolved so, keeping with times as such. And I think it's important that it begins to look into that. The issue of being a councillor, for instance, under the banner of the ANC. Do individuals who want to play that role get to be vetted? Do they submit their CVs? All such processes must now take place if, of course, this organization is to survive another century, for instance.
All right, Professor Barry Hanyane, political analyst and a professor with the University of the Northwest, and Adil Nchabileng, Transform RSA president. Just in wrapping up, especially when it comes to capacitating the party, being able to retain professionals and also compensate them adequately. We've seen with how the structures of the DA, for example, at various levels, including at the most basic ward or zonal areas. Is the ANC lacking in that aspect?
Yes, most definitely. The ANC is lacking, but not because it cannot do it. The ANC refuses to implement a lot of great ideas. I mean, there was an idea presented which we actually put together at some point during 2012 when Mangaung ended, to say that the ANC must create what they call a treasury fund. What does the treasury fund mean? It says this becomes a fund by which the TG of the organization, which is the TG of the ANC, should use that fund actually collecting various contributions coming from either members, people who have an interest in terms of supporting the party. But some of these great ideas are never implemented. I mean, this was well structured, this was well thought out, and actually based on what could have been done to help the party be less dependent on outside donations, as well as making sure that the party has its own asset, has its own capital, has its own cash, has its own liquidity. It can fund and pay for itself and can pay for other people. You cannot have a 21st century party, as Professor Berry was saying, that still at month-to-month basis, there is no surety whether they will be able to meet the next month's bills. It's not really quite okay, and yet you're in power. It shows you that there's actually fundamental differences.
And it makes you more susceptible to bribes and
influence and all sorts of things. Because companies can hijack you easily. People with resources and cash and capital will just come in and say, listen, for this particular interest, I want this outcome. You as a party, do what you need to do with the money. I need an outcome, and you have to push that outcome, unfortunately.
All right, we'll take a break. But Adil Nchabileng, Transform RSA president, will stay with us.